Leadership begins with a signal, but we really have to ask ourselves, what is it actually like to be on the receiving end of our own leadership? Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving deep into a fundamental truth about organizational dynamics. Some leaders, they broadcast a chaotic, reactive noise, but others broadcast absolute, intentional clarity. We're going to unpack the mechanics of that very signal and look at how we can move from accidental static to intentional influence. Think of every leader as a transmitter, constantly broadcasting. The problem is, we so rarely pause to ask what our teams are actually hearing on the other end. I mean, imagine adjusting an old, rusted radio dial. You hear distortion, there's a ton of interference, right? But somewhere buried in there is a voice trying to break through. If your team is constantly misaligned or they just seem to be struggling to hear you, we have to confront a really tough question. Is the problem their hearing, or is it our broadcasting? So, when a team disconnects, what does an accidental leader do? Well, they act like a guitar amp cranked all the way up to 10. It's loud, it's reactive, and honestly, it's overwhelming. They fall into the trap of assuming that volume equals clarity. But an intentional leader, they do something entirely different. They calibrate. They carefully tune the frequency. Because they understand that just cranking up the volume on a distorted signal, it only hurts everyone's ears. Intentional influence is all about seeking clarity over volume, tuning the message until that static finally fades. Let's step into Chapter 1, the transmitter model. We're starting with a hard, undeniable truth here. Communication is the absolute, ultimate test of relational integrity. We simply can't separate who we are from how we communicate. So, if our influence is going to carry any real weight, it literally has to be rooted in a deep, intentional presence. Picture this. You know the classic Monday morning hallway scene, right? We walk past a colleague, coffee in hand, and ask, "Hey, how was your weekend?" But let's be honest, we aren't asking to know. We're asking so we can pass by. It's this ritual of polite dismissal, entirely disguised as a connection. We actually design the question to produce a safe, short answer because our real goal is just to make it down the hall, close the office door, and get back to what we think is real work. We're acknowledging the task of being polite, absolutely, but we completely miss the human being right in front of us. And here's why that matters. A simple greeting, it's the smallest, most fundamental act of dignity. Skipping it creates the exact kind of static that destroys organizational synergy. When we march down the hall in silence, we're quietly broadcasting to our team that they are invisible. Now, it might seem like a totally minor omission, but make no mistake. A non-greeting culture is the exact birthplace of a deeply toxic environment. If you want to shift your culture, you have to start by actually seeing the people in it. So instead of those rapid-fire transactional questions that just hunt for quick updates, intentional transmitters use what we call quest questions. They use them to discover the person behind the task. See, a transactional question just asks, is it done? But a quest question leans in. It asks, what part of this are you most excited about? In our constant rush for corporate efficiency, we kind of tend to view curiosity as a waste of time. But these open-ended questions, they are exactly how we invite people out of the static and into genuine, powerful collaboration. This brings us to a really powerful concept, the open palm versus the closed fist. True liberators listen to transcend differences and build their people up, not just to quickly fix a problem. Most of us, if we're honest, listen with a tight fist. We're quietly preparing our rebuttal or formulating some brilliant solution while the other person is still talking. But opening your hand, that's an act of surrender. It essentially tells your team, hey, this conversation isn't about me proving I'm right, it's about truly understanding you. Okay, moving into Chapter 2, establishing structural safety. Because here's the thing. No matter how perfectly you tune your own frequency, if the environment itself is built on a foundation of fear, your signal is always going to get lost. When leaders operate accidentally, they end up creating what we call hinting cultures. And these are exhausting. They are environments where people speak in riddles, constantly tiptoeing around on eggshells, all because they are terrified of the leader's reaction. In a hinting culture, the actual truth is whispered by the coffee machine, but it is never, ever spoken out loud in the boardroom. It's an environment completely starved of psychological safety. Your team spends half their day just guessing what you actually want, and frankly, guessing is terrible for business. So how do we dismantle that fear? We do it by using 5 specific communication codes. These codes are brilliant because they tell your team exactly what game you're playing before the ball is even thrown. For example, if I come to you and say, hey, I need care, I'm telling you point blank, don't fix my problem, just be present with me. Or if I say, critique this, I'm giving you explicit, safe permission to find the holes without me taking it personally. Establishing this kind of common vocabulary completely smooths out those choppy, fear-driven lines of communication. Let's head into Chapter 3, the rules of engagement. Once we've actually established that structural safety, we have to strategically govern how different voices interact. Why? Because left to their own devices, certain loud voices will naturally and inevitably silence the quieter ones. Just consider what happens when a highly driven, perhaps immature pioneer dominates a meeting right out of the gate. Usually it's out of sheer excitement, but they essentially launch a silent grenade that completely shuts down the room. They come in hot with this massive, grand vision they've been obsessing over for weeks, and they expect instant agreement. But when they lead with that overpowering certainty, the quieter, more process-oriented voices don't argue back. They just quietly withdraw. The culture fractures. The damage is silent. Absolutely, but it is incredibly profound. Let's look at some really surprising and honestly somewhat alarming data to put this in perspective. While over half of corporate CEOs and leaders identify as pioneers, almost half of the general population are actually nurturers. That is a massive group of people left almost entirely unrepresented in leadership. Boardrooms naturally prize the loud, future-oriented strategist. But think about it. If your leadership team looks absolutely nothing like the massive base of your organization, your grand visions are going to completely miss the mark when it's time for actual execution. The takeaway here is absolutely crucial. If you only ever hear from the loud, futurist voices, you are missing the very people who act as the essential oil and structural infrastructure of your entire organization. The nurturers and guardians. They might want to move at 20 miles per hour just to ensure everyone stays safe, while the pioneers want to blast ahead at 100. Finding that optimum, sustainable speed requires actively inviting those quiet voices to the table. If they don't speak, the culture simply cannot grow. If you want to transform that accidental static into intentional empowerment, try running your meetings with this exact sequence. First, let the nurturers speak to secure relational harmony. Next, the creatives come in to innovate. Then, your guardians provide the necessary due diligence, followed by the connectors who frame the messaging. And finally, this is key, force the pioneers to listen and make them go last. When the strategic decision maker goes last, brilliant insights surface that would have literally been crushed in the first 5 minutes. It completely revolutionizes the architecture of your meetings. And that brings us to our final section, Chapter 4, Becoming a Liberating Leader. Knowing all these communication tools is one thing, right? But actually embodying the character required to use them? That requires a fundamental shift in our ultimate posture as leaders. A true liberator doesn't just lower the volume. They meticulously calibrate two very specific things: support and challenge. Let's break this down. A dominator brings extremely high challenge, but zero support. They just demand results. An abdicator brings neither. They're totally checked out. A protector offers lots of support, but is far too afraid to ever challenge the team. But a liberator? A liberator actively fights for the highest possible good of the people they lead. They provide the precise, heavy infrastructure needed to meet massive expectations. High support, high challenge. When we finally stop defaulting to being dominators or abdicators, something absolutely incredible happens. We unlock the hidden 50% of our team's efficiency. You see, a team made up of just one voice type operates with a massive, highly dangerous blind spot. Intentional synergy recognizes a deeply humbling truth. Your most exhausting weakness is very likely someone else's life-giving strength. We are fundamentally designed to need each other to see the whole picture. At its core, leadership is a profound moral responsibility. It is a true stewardship of the people entrusted to you, and it demands absolute relational integrity. It's not about concentrating your own power or broadcasting your own brilliance. It is entirely about multiplying theirs. When you truly listen, when you start asking the right questions, and when you intentionally make space for the quiet voices, you aren't just managing people. You are actively healing the static in your organization. As you step back and begin to tune your own frequency moving forward, I want to leave you with this one thought to reflect on. Are you authentically leading from your true design, or are you just broadcasting noise because you think you have to? Drop the mask. Stop the performance. Choose to lead from the quiet, powerful truth of who you are actually designed to be. Because honestly, that is exactly where the static ends and where true intentional influence begins.